Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Claudia, and you are listening to the podcast Architektura Powinna. Yes, it's a Polish title, and it means architecture should. What does architecture should and what shouldn't? Well, we are here to find out. I talk here with various inspiring people, such as architects, urban designers, creators, writers, whoever wants to talk, and whoever has an impact or knowledge about the space that surrounds us. It's a beautiful platform. It's a magical world that today is becoming even more open and accessible because I have an English episode for you with a very fascinating, inspiring person. I'm not going to hide it anymore. I'm not going to hide it because you've seen the title. So, ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Libeskind. He's known for his ability to evoke cultural memory in buildings. And what does it actually mean and why is it important? Let's find out very soon in this conversation. You might know Daniel Libeskind for the design of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, which was the first museum dedicated to the Holocaust in the Second World War. That was also his architectural breakthrough. He became internationally recognizable. The museum opened in 2001. And 2 years later, he won the competition for the master plan for the reconstruction of the World Trade Center site in Lower Manhattan in New York. It's a design for the area that was destroyed by the terrorist attacks of 9/11, where today you can find various new developments such as transportation hub by Santiago Calatrava, One World Trade Center by SOM, Memorial Museum Pavilion by Snohetta. There is also a 9/11 Memorial Museum. The place of the destroyed towers is basically redesigned. It was created as a new area. The place of the towers itself is empty. The two voids are reflecting literally the absence of the former towers because there are voids. Each void has a waterfall on its outlines, on the edges. So when you approach the fountains through the square full of trees, you don't feel like you're in busy Manhattan anymore. The time really slows down. And when you approach the edge of this voice, you notice the names of the victims one by one. You listen to the sound of the water, you meditate for a moment. Projects of Daniel Libeskind and his studio are in many cases related to remembrance, to the memory, but also optimism. He says that architecture is the most optimistic of all fields because you feel you can move forward with it more than in any other field. You can make life better, more beautiful. And these are the words of Daniel Libeskind, and I like this great optimism. I think it is very needed to design spaces that commemorate huge tragedies in our history. Libeskind once said also that memory is the foundation of his projects, and I think many examples can prove these words. It's good to take a look at the Jewish Museum in Berlin, at the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa, Canada, Danish Jewish Museum, exhibition at the entrance to Auschwitz, former Nazi camp in Oświęcim in Poland, and also lately unveiled Dutch Holocaust Memorial of Names in Amsterdam. But his studio designed many other buildings. His portfolio is gigantic. I need to mention the Grand Canal Theatre in Dublin, the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, or the residential tower Złota 4444 in Warsaw. And there are many other residential buildings and towers. Very impressive, various, numerous portfolio. Following the event of the completion of the Dutch Holocaust Names Memorial in Amsterdam, I found it very important to broaden the topic and talk about the past, present, and the future in architecture. Therefore, in this episode, we are going to talk about why the memory is relevant, why is it important, why does architecture function as a sort of medium for remembrance, how does architecture transfer these memories, what are the tools and that we have and how to use these tools, Or the questions like how to materialize sadness, how to make the absence visible. I feel like that might be the biggest challenge in the architecture of memory. How to evoke the collective memory and how to make it a bit more personal. Lots of crucial topics, lots of meaningful thoughts, and a great architectural eye opening experience for me, and I hope also for you. Let's listen to the conversation with Daniel Libeskind. Today, I have for you a special guest, Polish, Jewish, American architect, artist, and set designer. Yes, hello, Daniel Libeskind. Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry, bardzo, bardzo ładnie tutaj mówić trochę po polsku, tak.
Może powinniśmy rozmawiać po polsku.
No
Nie...
tak, może trochę, ale niektóre słowa brakują mi.
Ale jestem pod wrażeniem. I'm really impressed with your Polish. I wasn't
No ja
sure.
mówiłem po polsku z rodzicami i siostrą, teraz nie mam okazji z kim mówić, ale bardzo lubię polski język.
Let's switch to English. We're going to talk about the time in architecture and architecture of memory. You and your studio design many cultural places, spaces devoted to commemorating meaningful or tragic parts of our history. You design many places devoted to the Holocaust. Also, this month is very special. There was the 20th anniversary of 9/11 attacks in New York City. It was also an unveiling of the Dutch Holocaust Memorial of Names in Amsterdam. Very special month for the remembrance and the memory of architecture. So let's start with the question, why is it even important? What do memorials mean for the society, for the city? Why do we even talk about it?
It's a wonderful question, very profound. People should think about why do we need memory? Why can't we just be without any memory? This is what Nietzsche, the nihilists, always said: forget everything, don't have any memory, then you'll be the Ubermensch, the Superman. Then you won't need God, you won't need anything. You'll be free to do whatever you want. But we know that, without memory, we have no direction in life. We are memory ourselves. Our brains, we as human beings are formed by memory. Our parents, our families, our traditions. And so memory is not really an extra capacity of our being. Memory is the very foundation of who we are. It's where we come from. And of course, without memory, we would be unable to know where we are going, who we are. Our identities are based on our memory. So to me, memory is not a footnote. It's really the ground from which architecture rises, from which cities rise. And that's why I not only cherish memory, but I think there is something divine about memory. Memory is something awesome, something wondrous.
Mm-hmm. And then how the process of the translation, this memory into architecture looks like, how this approach for the design process look like later.
Well, every building should, be based on memory. If you don't base a building on memory, let's say you're building a house or a apartment block or a hospital, then you're bound to create just an abstract work that has little to do with its roots, where it's located, who lived there, what was it about, what was the community, what are the inaudible voices in the site telling you, what are the invisible spaces which are still there speaking to you about. So to me, that is the core in architecture for every building, but particularly when it comes to spaces where tragedy took place, where something that we must remember, that is not really a choice, but we have to remember it because our life depends on it. Then, of course, those sites, the sites of monuments like the one in Amsterdam, the site of Ground Zero where thousands of people perished in a terrorist attack, remind us that memory also protects us, protects our freedom and liberty. Without memory, we might become slaves.
You recently visited Amsterdam and the newest Holocaust memorial, the Memorial of Names. What was your experience and the first impression? Was it more personal, knowing your background and your origin, or was it more, about the design and the space?
For those people who have not visited the Names Monument, to have 102,000 names of murdered Jews and also Roma and Sinti, to see the names on each of the bricks which I use, and not just to see the name and date of birth, but also to see the age at which people were murdered. You see 7, you see 12, you see 55, you see 0. You begin to see that there is something important in this space, because, of course, these people have no graves, and yet it is a public space in the middle of a beautiful city of Amsterdam. And of course, it's not just looking at the irreversible past, which is irreversible. We can't bring the dead back to life in no way. But there is a future. And the future is the light of the city, which is also, of course, directed by those 4 emblematic letters which say, in memory of, to remember. And I was struck as I was going through this kind of labyrinth and spaces where I could see people, how just young people who have really no direct connection to any past, were slowing down, where we're looking in a different way, where we're discovering something perhaps about themselves and about their own past. So yes, it's really about an experience. It's not about an abstraction. It's not about architectural form. It's not about just doing something that looks nice, but attempting to delve into the spiritual aspect of what is a name. What is a name, and what are those names to us today? And in what way can this memory inspire us with something good in life?
It seems like incredibly big responsibility for the designers. That's first of all. And second of all, the big responsibility how to create the memorial for collective memory. It's not a history of one person. It's not devoted to one story, but really many. And that's very interesting. Like when you have thousands of victims, you are still trying to really devote at least little space for one person.
And I think about it, Anne Frank is just one brick in the 102,000 bricks. We know the story of Anne Frank. We've heard about it. We maybe even read it. We identify, wow, it's a story of a human being, of a young girl who was murdered. But think about it, it's just one brick among the 102,000 bricks. So each brick is that kind of a story. Each brick has something to tell us. And I think that's really the power of the name, that, even if you pass by, you walk across and you pass maybe hundreds of names in a step in this memorial. There is something in that air, in that part of Amsterdam, in that beautiful sector of the city, that hangs and is also part of you now. What does it mean? How do you grasp it? That's really up to each person who's there.
Yeah. Especially, it's very fascinating to notice that it's literally in the middle of the very fast, a bit noisy city in very
think about
vibrant district.
Totally. I mean, think about it. This is the area where those Jews lived. That's where those houses were. This is the neighborhood. It's not just some sort of abstract site. This is exactly the site where the Jewish sector of the city was. Very successful city, founded by many working people in different walks of life. So it's very meaningful that they are brought back, so to speak. They came back in a very unexpected way to their neighborhood.
Did you manage to walk around a little bit more around the monument and maybe further in the city?
Of course. Well, I know Amsterdam well. I've been there, really many, many, many times over my, life, and I love the city. it's a city from which you can get a vantage point to the world, because it's a world city. It's not just sort of Holland. So yes, you get a sense of belonging. And that's an interesting point. Today, death has been sort of exiled. We don't have any longer the mythology of death, the dance of death. Death is now more technological, industrialized. We don't have the processions through the city of the dead, where people raise their hats, take off their hats, and watch the procession go through. That has become something abstract to us. And that's a tragedy, because we all know we're going to die. We all know what that means. And think about Prometheus, that great savior of mankind. He brought fire to humanity. But what he considered even greater gift that he gave to humanity is not to reveal when a person dies. He decided to hide when someone will die. And that he considered his greatest gift to humanity. But it tells us a lot about victimhood. It tells us a lot about what we don't want to know about. And it tells us about the urgency to remember tragedies, and to remember that we too could be part of that. Only by luck, maybe, we have not been there, or by accident of nature, by accident of birth, we were not part of that. So, just a slight meditation on the importance of memory.
Yeah, and the memorial in Amsterdam is such a place. That's why I wanted to place it in the context of the a bit faster, vibrant district and the city, because that's the place when you stop, and
yes,
it is sort of meditation, spatial meditation.
It is, because there is also, on those brick walls, there is a gap, and then there is a stainless steel, those 4 emblematic letters that reflect. They are stainless steel, reflective stainless steel, that bring the city image right in, supported on those walls. So you have a certain sense that the city around you is actually supported by those names. And the reflectivity, bringing the light, gives you the sense of hope, gives you the sense that the past cannot be changed, but the future can be. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have a future today which is threatened. Democracy is under threat. Authoritarians rise. There is hatred around the world. And we have to think about it. We have to do something about it. We cannot just cooperate with darkness.
I mean, from the other hand, watching the past 1.5 year, we were sort of in a strong relationship with death, and I think the experience and the perception of death really, we took a closer look at it, and I think we managed to stop for a bit and think.
Because you're right that's why votive offerings to the dead, the culture of remembrance, is deeper than language. It came before language developed. If you go to the most ancient things, it's veneration. It's the fact that just because people are not there doesn't mean they don't belong to you any longer. They still belong to you. They still belong to your memory. They're not just gone. They are not just accidents of nature. That's different for human beings than for animals. That we remember, and we remember deeply. And in that sense, there is also, a sense of immortality, of God, of divinity. That life is not a meaningless, just happening. That we just are born and we die and it means nothing. That there is care in what we do, and that care has to do a lot with memory. A lot of that care is our memories, and which allows us to act in a good way.
But then the big challenge is the materialization of this metaphysical impressions, like how to spatially design sadness or some terrifying emotions or hope. Like really, how to show muteness, right? How to show absence. That's
You're
probably
right.
the question that you maybe answered already a couple of times.
Well, I think it's a very good question, because architects cannot design by words. Architects can only design by light, with material, with the real world, so to speak, for people. And I think it's a special art, proportions, what materials you use, how do you structure them, how do you bring them to some sort of a composition that speaks, that says something, and isn't just just an abstract piling of material. And how do you use light, which is really, in a way, not manipulable. Light doesn't come from us. It comes from elsewhere, towards us. So how do we use that light that comes towards us and communicate that light to every person who will come to this memorial of names? Or at Ground Zero, it's a vast piece of the city of New York. It's a central space. How do you bring light, given that you have so many skyscrapers that throw shadows onto the streets? So in that side, I moved the buildings very far away, and I didn't build anything in the center where the memorial is, so that the memorial would be full of light, full of sun, not full of shadows of tall buildings. So yes, those are sort of the means of architecture, which in a way seem very poor and very miserable in comparison to, the linguistic virtuosity of literature or poetry. But still, they are virtuous in their own way.
Yeah, sometimes maybe in the music also the pause really in a good place for a couple of seconds, speaks more than the music. Or the pause in the speaking word also means a lot. The voids in Manhattan in replacement of the towers that were destroyed also speak sometimes more than really expressive, full of materialization.
Yes, one of the reasons for that is I brought in water. The waterfalls were part of my idea for the master plan, because water speaks. The flowing water in the center of Manhattan, suddenly you don't hear the cars and the sirens and the busy life. You hear the water, and the sound of nature is also something that brings you to a spiritual experience when you see the names of those who perished on that fateful day. So yes, it's a musical actually idea that I had. In the beginning, people were the tabloids thought crazy. Libeskind is bringing, Niagara Falls to Manhattan. How crazy is that? But it is not crazy, judging by how much people love to be there and sort of commune with the space and see the future as well.
These references with the music, architecture with the music, is something that you refer quite frequently on. Yeah, where does it come from?
Well, I was a musician in my former lifetime. I played the accordion, and in Poland, I performed, very early on. I think I was when the Polish television came on. I think I was one of the first performers on it. Maybe I was 6 years old or 7. Who knows? But I was a virtuoso. And when I came, when I competed in the America-Israel Prize, I won the prize together with Itzhak Perelman, one of the most famous violinists in the world today. So, and there were only 5 winners, and I was luckily one of them. But, I guess I played the wrong instrument, because, when I won that competition, Isaac Stern, that great violinist, told me, you're playing the wrong instrument. You've got to play the piano, because you're already exhausted everything you can do on the accordion. And then I drifted into other interests, and yet I retained the fact that architecture is pure music, really. It's very musical. We kind of sense it acoustically, because we are oriented by sound, in our inner ear, not by eyes. In any case, there is a musical flow in architecture, musical proportions. As you said, the silence, the gaps, the sense of harmonies also that architecture produces. The vibrations are the same as in music, and not by coincidence is this analogy already so ancient. The harmony of the spheres, right? When you look at the stars, when you look at the planets, you hear the sound of the cosmos. People thought about it thousands of years ago, and it's true today. I think as long as architecture remains, a humanistic discipline and not a technological, bureaucratized industry, then that human sense will always be part of it.
Yeah. Maybe there is something in it that nowadays we forgot to think that it's very multi-sensorial how we experience architecture. We would focus mainly on our vision. We would forget all the other senses. And the design with the senses I really experienced during visiting the Jewish Museum in Berlin, where it was a lot of play with the light, the sound. It was very moving. I was curious how important in the architecture of memory, in memorials, in the architecture of remembrance, how important the symbolism is. Is it really, the leading thing in the architecture of memory?
Well, it depends what we understand by symbol. Let me make this sort of clear. There's nothing which is not symbolic. Even an empty wall, even just an empty piece of paper, we cannot escape. We are doomed to meaning. We cannot escape it. We are doomed to a story. That's our exile. We are exiled into a meaning. That's what makes us human. And of course, if you start thinking, a symbol is not necessarily just a flag or just something that you think is sort of a sign of something, but symbol has a deep meaning. So everything is symbolic. You cannot escape from it. But of course, how to think about it? What is water at ground zero? Well, you can say it's a symbol, but what does that mean? It means that the water flows, that the water comes from somewhere, that the water can freeze, that the water can evaporate, that we are mostly made out of water, and so on and so on. So, I'm not a fan of people using symbols like a sign, some sort of cheap encyclopedia of ready-made meanings. But the deep sense of symbolic meaning is the deep sense of being human. How do I explain it? It's not something you can look in a reference book. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of books like by Jung and others about symbols. I mean, you can buy one for a few dollars and get all the symbols in the world, but you will never find a symbol in there. Never. Because the symbols are somewhere else. They are part of your life.
Yeah, maybe these literal symbols, the drawings, the shapes, they are working pretty well, but usually for the limited part of the society. That's for right. A certain culture. And
that's right.
And when you design the space for certain emotions, it's really for every user from every possible culture.
That's right. When you enter a space, you can be anyone. You can be a child. You don't know anything about. You just open the door, and that's the power of architecture. It can speak to you if it's meaningful. It can speak to you in its own voice, and that's the sort of magic of architecture. There's no other field. In language, we have to understand each other. In Polish and German and English and French, there are always barriers. There are walls that divide us. The language of Babel. In the Bible, right? The mix of language that we cannot communicate. But architecture is sort of a language that is mysterious because it's open. It doesn't depend on nationality or religion, on where you come from. It's open to you because it's in the sky and it's in the earth and it's there. And that's the wonder of architecture, because it's always for the others. It's not just for us, it's for others.
But of course, you need to be conscious how to use the tools that architecture provides, because of course, it's possible to create very disturbing places, the spaces where people will get lost and be confused and will feel bad. Well, maybe sometimes it's intentionally, but most of the cases you would like your users to feel quite positive in certain spaces.
Well, more than that, there are really no users in architecture. Because the user analogy, and I appreciate what you said, is a functionalistic analogy. You've got point A and point B, and a user goes from point A to point B and point C. But a human being is never a user. A human being is a full spiritual person with a soul and a heart and a mind. Mm-hmm. And I think if you care about people, then you would not reduce them to users. You would reduce them to full people, to full personalities.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of care is something which is deep in all religions. And there is a reason for it, because that's the human being. Human being is not just a capacity to act. It's a capacity to be and to think and to dream and
Yeah,
to have
but
faith.
I think in the architectural profession, sometimes we even have more this kind of brutal words. You know,
Yes, you're right.
we have target groups
I
that we
know.
are designing for.
You're completely correct. And I've always tried to rebel against that idea of, making architecture more like a technicized profession, sort of like people on Wall Street use the algorithm, or industrialists, in factories, because architecture is a humanistic art. And what does it mean, humanistic art? That means a liberal art. And what does liberal art mean? It means free. Liberal means you're free. And that's how the Greeks thought about it. You can think of us, the stars of poetry, of dance, of tragedy, of lyrics, of geometry. Those are all free arts. And that's why I think architecture is committed to giving freedom to people. If you really think in that way, it's about freedom. Freedom is not just a propagandistic word, used by some politicians. It's what architecture can give when it opens itself to others in meaningful ways. And so, yes, I'm all for architecture being one, the mother of the arts, which it is. And who's the mother of the arts? Is memory. Mnemosyne, right? Is the mother of all the muses in the ancient world.
But even from the political systems, we know that too much freedom, maybe that's also not a solution. So my question would be, is there then a border, a line that you cannot cross as a designer?
It's a good question. Well, look, we are threatened by two things all the time, by order and by disorder. Order is a threat, and so is disorder. And so we have to find the balance in between these extremes that tear the world apart. Order can be ordered in many ways, and you can hear the marching troops just behind it. And disorder is the anarchy. It's the evil of, destruction. So how do we find a way in between? By the way, the word interest means in between.
Which
interest, in between.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have the any spatial example of this total order and disorder?
Sure. Total order is the Karl Marx Allee in Berlin, where Stalin built those horrifying buildings. Look, in Warsaw, the Palace of Culture and Science has wiped out the whole neighborhood and built a new order coming down from the fake gods of communism to oppress Poland. That was order.
Mm-hmm.
And how hateful is it? How terrible it is to have that kind of order. Fascists did it, the Nazis did it, the Soviets did it, communists did it. You can see it all around the world. So that's why we should never accept that kind of an order. And disorder is, the slums in Mumbai, where people live, within a few square centimeters inside with dirt and with disease, and have no other option but to drink polluted water. So we have to prevent ourselves, see those things as extremes that are not, not conducive to life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we are talking a lot about the time, how to understand the past, how to be conscious about the presence, and then wonder about the future. So this is basically about the dialogue with the history. What is the most important when do we speak about dealing with the heritage, with the architectural heritage? Because that's the memory that we already have in our cities. We have a lot of old buildings, and always the question appears what to do with them. How should we deal with them?
It's a great question. Look, one should not be too nostalgic or sentimental, because memory is all the time with us, and history is not over. we're part of it. We cannot speak about it as the past. It's also, as you said, the present and the future. So we have to create a balance. I think we have to really love history. We have to appreciate what it has brought to us, because we are, riding on its crest. We are sort of on the crest of that wave of history. But we also have to treat it in a dialogue, as you said, in a way which makes sense to us, which gives it life again. Because history can become obscured and can become blurred, and it can even become fake when it's maintained as if it was dead. Mm-hmm. So one has to, in the Jewish Museum in Berlin, I intervened in the historical Baroque building by building a kind of a void all the way to the foundations of the building. In all my buildings, I never had a site which is free of history. In Dresden, I intervened in a historical armory that was built in the 19th century with a kind of a cut through it. In San Francisco, I worked with, City Beautiful building to create another building within it. In Toronto, at the Royal Ontario Museum, you work with a historical building. So it's always a conversation to me. It's not just, wash your hands and don't touch anything because it's old, nor just forget about history and do whatever you like. You have to sort of care about it and bring it into a balanced view and give it life again.
Is it your dialogue usually based on the contrast? We can notice that you play with the lack of 90 degrees right angles, for example, voids, expressive forms, and radical shapes. Is that sort of the big contrast with the historical buildings? Is it the language that you want to speak?
It's hard to generalize, but the examples you brought are musical examples. They are examples of counterpoint. It's not homonymy. It's not a monodic sense. Just keep the same. It's polyphonic. There is counterpoint in it. If I was adding a building to my own building, it might be very, very different from the additions I've done to other buildings. It might be just the opposite, might be just very, very different in formal structure. So it's hard to say, but yes, it's always a conversation. And conversation, what is a conversation in music? It's contrapuntal. It's not just adding one more voice with the same melody to just multiply the same. And, all you have to do is listen to a Bach, toccata or to a Bach, choral work to see the importance of that conversation, particularly when it comes to storytelling, like the story of resurrection, story of the passion. It's a story. And let's not forget that architecture is also telling a story, as far as I can see it. It's not an abstract art which just puts a volume next to another volume. Not at all. It's a story which is being transmitted. The story, as you said, can have breaks in it, can have gaps, can have unexpected encounters. The story is not really just the narrative, in the beginning was the word. There are different narratives. All you have to do is read, Ulysses by James Joyce or a novel by Proust and see how the narrative winds its way in unexpected directions. And that's also architecture, as I see it. It's a story, but it's not a bore.
I'm curious how open this story might be, or like how determined as a designer you want the story to be, because of course you would like inhabitants, visitors, people, I mean, these human beings, I'm not saying users. You would like to understand what is the story of the building, what is it about, but then perhaps not too precisely, perhaps you give also a blank page for a free interpretation. I'm curious, how to find this balance.
I mentioned Bach. You don't have to be a musicologist and delve into Bach's manuscript to see that he put all sorts of emblems. He even put his name, B-A-C-H, in his works all the time. He signed them within the music. Shakespeare too uses the word will in many different ways to say that that's him. But the fact is that you can enjoy music without knowing anything. You can enjoy a page of Shakespeare without knowing much about anything about Elizabethan times. So you don't need to know much to enjoy a composition which has integrity. But if you want to delve further, you can see that there are layers of meaning in it, just like there are layers of meaning in Bach that are endless. There are layers of meaning in Shakespeare that are endless. You can go on and just look at the literature. 1 million books have been written about each of those things, because there's so much that they are endless. They cannot be finished. They're like an ocean. I think that's the truth of any work of art, that it has many aspects to it, which cannot really be exhausted, and yet they're open. You don't need to know anything about it. You don't need to know anything about Denmark and Elizabethan England and the marketplace to enjoy Hamlet.
Well, yeah, but I'm curious because then if we wouldn't have to know anything, about the history, for example, to experience certain spaces and enjoy the buildings and read the story that the buildings tell us, then we wouldn't destroy thousands of the important part of the heritage in architecture. We still would have many amazing buildings. We wouldn't meet the opinion sometimes that architects build for architects, and maybe other people don't enjoy the space as much as when architects visit some maybe brutalism architecture. And then I feel like it has to be this background of understanding in order to get the story.
No, I think, architecture, let's put it this way, is the unconscious of society. We get the cities in some way which just materialize in front of. We don't know how they happened, that the brutalist architecture is there and all those buildings in London and all that stuff. And yet we see ourselves in that mirror. We see that's who we were. That was post-war. That's how we thought about the future at that time. So, that's the power of architecture, that it is a mirror of us. Because unlike a poem or a piece of music, it's not just individual, it's public. And it's created in a public sphere. Even a private house, needs a public permission to be built. So architecture is a civic art. And as a civic art, it has these responsibilities. And also, let's not forget that it's an art. It's not just civic, it's a civic art. And so in that sense, what you're saying is sort of we're bound by the cities we are born into. We didn't choose to be born in a city that was bombed and was rebuilt, quickly and sloppily because there was no money, and that's what we got. We got, Stalinic done in a Soviet kind of style. We would have liked it to be rebuilt in a way which is really profound in the way that it was before the destructions of the Germans. So we don't have a choice. We are born into that, and somehow it also becomes part of our challenge. How do we go on in a city? How do we build it in our time and for the future? So it's interesting questions. You are asking very philosophical questions. It's not easy to answer.
Sorry.
Great.
Talking about the time, it's also interesting that the certain spaces can cause that the time itself it's slowing down, or it's speeding up. That's also possible, or makes us think more conscious about the presence, sort of the spaces of meditation.
Of course, you're right, because architecture is not just in space; it's in time, and it's both an experience of simultaneity. When you're in a city, you're simultaneously with all the millions of people that live in that city, and whatever they are doing, you're part of that moment. But also it's in time because it's always dynamic. It's always going to be changing. So yes, I think every person has that experience. And what are those experiences? When you walk on a street, when you look at a window, when you see a homeless person lying on a corner of a street, when you see somebody running to catch, a bus, you have a kind of a kaleidoscope of the city, both as static and dynamic at the same time. It's a really fantastic question to ask. How can architecture contribute to the good? One of the ways it can contribute is by making you slow down in some way, particularly when it comes to remembering something which you might have forgotten. to give you a sense that the future is now, that you're living in eternity already, that you don't have to wait for many years, that you're now already in the eternal. That moment is full of everything. I spoke to, I had a dinner with an astronaut here in New York, an astronaut who spent the most time on the space shuttle of any astronaut. And I asked him, when he was in the darkness of that deep space and fixing something on this space shuttle, I said, what did you think? What were your thoughts when you were in that blackness? And he said, I looked towards the little globe, the little green dot, in the horizon. And I thought, we already live in paradise. We are already in paradise. So that was a beautiful kind of a summary of what I'm trying to say.
Well, very, very positive summary.
Yes, it has to be positive because life is beautiful. We should not miss it. It's a wonderful thing. We're not going to live twice.
Yeah. No, I'm very glad for such a positive summary. Even though the subject is not the happiest from one point of view.
But you're right. But a memorial can give you a transcendence. A memorial is something good. It's something positive. It's not something looking back and being sad and depressed. It also is being able to bring that catastrophe to another level, to something that you can be conscious of, and you can also do something which is positive. So, if you read, if you listen to a sad, piece of music or read a terribly unhappy novel, it brings you something. It brings you upwards. It doesn't bring you downwards. If it's good, if it's good, there is something fantastic in it that has lifted your soul. If it's bad, it's just depressing and you should throw the book out. Then it's just kind of a literature of the absurd. But if it's, look, if you read Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, it's a terrible thing. It's about murder. But at the end of the book, you can see something that tells you something more about the world, something good about the world.
Perfect. Daniel, thank you so much for this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. You're wonderful. You're such a knowledgeable and smart person. I wish you all the best.
Thank you for your input. I believe that my listeners and I certainly, we become more and more conscious about the space that we are living in. And for sure, thank you for a big input of the huge positivity.
Thank you so much. All the best to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Let me know what you think about the talk and what are your thoughts on the architecture of memory or on our topic. You can find me in Amsterdam. On my social media channels like Instagram, Facebook, on the name Architektura Powinna. Thank you again. Have a great day. And I see you, I hear you, you hear me in the next episode.